tonight on CBC Vancouver News. The heightened avalanche risk on BC mountains.
The mountains never lie.
The most dangerous conditions in decades and the warnings from one man buried under the snow. Plus, a new tax credit for multiple generations of people to live together. Why critics say it's not going to help with affordability. And an industry at a crossroads. What's sparking the conversation that fine dining is unsustainable and in need of a shakeup.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. Well, BC is facing its most dangerous avalanche season in decades. There are many peaks that are concerning because of weak snow, and the conditions are being compared to the deadly 2003 season, which was the worst on record in our province. The CBC's John Hernandez is speaking with a survivor who is urging people to be careful.
The most important message is that I sensed the tragedy coming.
20 years later, the conditions on the mountainside are still seared into Ken Wiley's memory.
The avalanche danger rating was sitting at around considerable. There was a deep snowpack instability, and we wanted to go skiing.
He was in a large group of skiers ascending the La Traviata couloir near Revelstoke. They pushed on despite dangerous conditions.
The skiers went out when the risk of an avalanche was rated considerable.
My body was screaming at me that morning. Like, I didn't want to be there.
An avalanche came crashing down. Wiley and 12 others were buried. 7 of them died.
People say, oh, well, I'm wearing an avalanche transceiver, we're carrying shovels, we're okay. But being buried is totally out of bounds, right? Because effectively what it is that your chances are 50-50.
With the 20th anniversary of the deadly tragedy just days away, current conditions atop many BC mountains are eerily similar.
We have these buried weak layers which form during periods of relative drought over the past few months. The last time we saw a snowpack of this sort of magnitude, many professionals are reaching back to 2003.
Avalanche Canada is warning of considerable risks along the coast and moderate risk in the interior and the northwest region. Those taking to the backcountry are advised to think twice before taking on steep terrain.
The best thing that backcountry users can do is to manage their terrain. So this snowpack is not going to disappear anytime soon. These weak layers will persist for quite some time now.
Have a trip plan, and if conditions do look dangerous, trust your gut and don't be afraid to speak out.
Be socially courageous. Like, if your friends are pushing you into terrain that you think isn't good, say no. No, our plan was to stay out of, steeper terrain.
Decisions that can hopefully prevent future tragedies atop these mighty peaks. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
And you heard Ken Wiley there. He mentioned an avalanche transceiver. Coming up in the show, we go out with crews who actually demonstrate how it's used. To healthcare now, the BC government says it's making it easier for foreign-trained nurses to work here. As Mira Baines reports, hefty financial support is also being extended to nurses who left the job but now want to return.
As BC continues to grapple with the need for nurses, the province says it wants to remove barriers in hopes of bolstering the healthcare system.
Well, right now, candidates in this scenario are waiting 3 years to be granted registration. Our goal is to bring it down with these reforms to between 4 to 9 months.
Premier David Eby says for nurses trained abroad, the province plans to spend $1.3 million to streamline the licensing process.
Whether a nurse was trained in our province or not, we're ready to welcome those who are ready to care for British Columbians.
This pediatric nurse from the Philippines says she managed to navigate the system, but others have not.
In the unit I work now, I am the only IEN. However, a lot of our clerks, our care aides, were all nurses back in their home countries.
For Canadian-trained nurses, the government will offer financial support of up to $4,000 to cover applications, assessments, and eligible travel costs for current nurses to re-enter the system. There will also be up to $10,000 in bursaries for any additional education they may need to get back to work. Despite nursing shortages, the province is opening hospital emergency operations centers to help deal with the highly transmissible COVID variant XBB 1.5. Health Minister Adrian Dix says 10,000 people were in acute care across the province as of Thursday, up 6% from New Year's Eve.
Historically high levels of people in hospital, that we're facing the most challenging period in healthcare, which is typically January and February. We're in the midst of a respiratory illness season and a pandemic.
The president of the BC Nurses Union, meanwhile, says vacancies abound.
As of this past spring, 5,200 vacancies here in BC, and by 2031, we need 26,000 new nurses.
For its part, the province says 2,000 nurses are in the registration and assessment process now and could be working in 90 days. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
A new federal tax credit designed to help seniors and adults with disabilities live with their families launched this month. The new multi-generational home renovation tax credit aims to help families add a secondary unit to existing homes. But as Belpuri reports, it may not be a catalyst for any significant change.
The newly completed Lane House is an affordable option for adult children priced out of real estate. It's also a sign that multi-generational living is taking hold.
I think because of the cost of living in Vancouver, people are having to look at different and more creative ways of trying to find ways for young families to live in this neighborhood.
To that end, last spring, the federal government announced a new multi-generational home renovation tax credit to encourage more Lane houses and suites. Starting this year, families can claim a one-time 15% tax credit for up to $50,000 in renovation and construction costs of a secondary unit. The most one gets back is $7,500.
The tax credit that's being offered doesn't quite make a dent.
Henry Belisle's family-owned construction company has been doing home reno since 1985. At best, he says $50,000 could spruce up an out-of-date suite.
I think the tax credit applies really well to that, because what you're really looking to do is to update the infrastructure of the space, whether that's fireproofing, having proper heating and cooling and control of water, for example. And that could be reasonably done within that budget.
Anything more? Not so much.
Tax credits, they fall into the category of, this is welcome, it's better than nothing, but they generally don't fundamentally make something unaffordable affordable.
The average cost of a Lane house is $500,000. $7,500 covers 1.5%.
That's not going to be an initiative to anybody to get together and do it. That's not going to work. It's just not very much money.
The Ford family doesn't qualify for the refundable tax credit. It's available only if the unit is occupied by seniors or adults with disabilities. The Fords built the Lane house for their daughter and partner, and they don't plan to trade places for at least another 15 years. Belpuri, CBC News, Vancouver.
A Metro Vancouver pastor is facing multiple charges after alleged sex assaults against kids. Police say multiple reports of alleged incidents and a year-long investigation led to the arrest of Pastor Edwin Alvarez in Saanich last week. The alleged incidents happened over a 4-year period starting in 2017 when he was the pastor of a small, unnamed Metro Vancouver church.
People often take on leadership roles or roles where they have power and authority. They use that to gain the trust of families and their victims. They oftentimes will use those roles to manipulate people, and then when the opportunity arises, they abuse vulnerable children.
The 45-year-old was arrested in Saanich last week and charged with 3 counts of sexual interference and 3 counts of sexual assault. Police say there could be more victims, and they're asking anyone with information to come forward. 3 people have been found dead inside a home in Surrey's Fraser Heights neighborhood. They are believed to be from the same family. We don't have many details at this point. It did happen today. Let's go live to our Dan Burrett. Dan, what do we know?
Anita, homicide investigators have been called in, but details are few and far between so far. The RCMP says just after noon today, they were called to this house on 112th Avenue near 156th Street in Fraser Heights. Inside, Mounties found 3 people dead, and as you said, it's believed they are all part of the same family. Police say they didn't find anyone else at the property. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team is now involved It's not clear what led to the deaths of the 3 victims, but police said they don't believe the public is at risk. Fraser Heights is a very large residential area in North Surrey, lots of single-family homes and cul-de-sacs. IHED says it will have a transition meeting with Mounties, but that may wrap up late tonight, so more details may not be shared until tomorrow morning. We'll bring you any updates throughout this newscast and tonight at 11. Anita.
Dan Burr live tonight. Thanks, Dan. Well, the man charged in the stabbing death of his wife at their Surrey home last month has appeared in court. Navinder Gill is charged with second-degree murder in Harpreet Gill's death on December 7th. Police were called to their Newton home that evening and found the 40-year-old mother suffering from multiple stab wounds. Harpreet Gill later died in hospital.
At this point, if we take in consideration Canadian laws, innocent until proven guilty, so he is maintaining his innocence at this point in time.
It's unclear how Navinder Gill will plead, though. He will be back in court on February 10th. A 40-year-old man has died in hospital from his injuries after being stabbed outside a shelter in Vancouver yesterday night. The victim was attacked in a fight with one other person. It happened outside his home on Yukon Street in the Fairview neighborhood.
We don't believe this was random. And there's no indication that it was a stranger attack or that it was unprovoked. We believe there was an altercation between 2 people.
The suspect left after the stabbing, and so far, no arrests have been made. Well, thousands marched in North Vancouver yesterday, marking the 3rd anniversary of Flight PS 752 being shot down by an Iranian missile. Activists are urging people to pay attention on days other than the commemoration.
Because when there is attention, there's less the cost of committing a crime and the cost of killing people would be higher for the regime.
Bajakian is calling on non-Iranian Canadians for support, as solidarity is important in order to make progress in holding Iran accountable. 55 of the 176 passengers who died were Canadians, and many called BC home. An Iranian missile shot down the Ukrainian flight 3 years ago, shortly after takeoff from Tehran.
Each one of them was a Canadian and was part of our community, and they were making a difference one way or the other. And I think that in decades, maybe centuries, people would talk about the shooting down of PS 752 as a turning point in the definition of Canadian identity.
This year's anniversary comes amid anti-government protests in Iran and among Iranian people worldwide. Johanna Wake staff is away tonight, and Kuljeet, looks like we should probably keep the rain gear handy for the foreseeable future, eh?
Not so fast, Anita, actually. You can switch out the umbrellas for maybe some, I don't know, they call them sunglasses, I believe.
Oh, I was ready for so much rain.
It's going to come back, but we are going to get a bit of a break, and it's a much-needed break. We got a ton of rain over the weekend for the Lower Mainland and for Greater Victoria. We do have right now winds picking up along the coast for Port Hardy, up to 80 kilometers an hour tonight into tomorrow, so very, very cold through there. A little bit of rain this afternoon started. We're going to get scattered showers overnight and into tomorrow morning, and hopefully by about noon that break in the rain starts for us, and it will last for just more than a day. Current temperatures across the province right now, -3 and cold in Prince George, 0 in Ashcroft, 9 degrees in Vancouver, and very humid. We're above seasonal temperatures as well, so it is feeling a little bit muggy. For tomorrow across the province, a lot more sunshine for Prince George, Williams Lake, even Kelowna, but we will see, along with the wind for the coast, we will see some rain tomorrow for Prince Rupert, -4 there, 8 degrees for Port Hardy, and cloudy for us. Rain for the sunset tonight, earlier today, I should say, and then tomorrow clouds as we wake up. Just around 8:05 is the sunrise. The rain, like I said, ends at noon and goes away for about a day and a half. I'll have the 7-day forecast, Anita, coming up with details on when the rain returns.
Okay, well, I'm glad I'm wrong. Thanks, Kuljeet.
You're welcome.
A Port Moody couple's dream wedding may be on the rocks after the BC Supreme Court ruled their Ucluelet venue can no longer hold big events. Marianne Dawson and Brendan Crosby booked the lodge at Terrace Beach for their wedding last May, but they're now scrambling to find a replacement venue. Neighbors lodged an official complaint about a planned expansion at the property and the associated noise that it might bring. The court has agreed, leaving the couple heartbroken that the venue isn't allowed to fulfill its existing business contracts. Well, a surprising find from UBC researchers who say sea sponges off BC's coast block some COVID-19 infections. An international team of researchers led by UBC scientists analyzed a catalog of more than 350 compounds derived from natural resources that include plants, fungi, and marine sponges. The aim was to find new antiviral drugs that can be used to treat COVID-19 variants like Omicron.
These compounds are effective in blocking the infection of the virus from the different variants of the COVID-19. So these compounds block the infection, so we cannot see more virus in the cells after a few days. So they are very efficient because we need to use very small amount of these compounds to block completely the infection of the virus in the cells.
The researchers say the results are encouraging, but there is much more to do that has been done with antiviral medication that could be developed. Well, among the recent changes to BC housing in 2023, landlords will now have to pay interest on damaged deposits they collect from renters. It's calculated at 4.5% below the prime lending rate. This makes the interest rate payable on security and pet deposits at 1.95%. Now, if there is damage and a landlord wants to make any deductions to the deposit, they must first ask the tenant to agree, but interest will still be calculated on the original deposit before deductions. Interest is still calculated on the full deposit before those deductions, and interest has not been applied to rental deposits since 2009. Well, as we told you earlier, BC is facing its most dangerous avalanche risk in decades, but there are tech solutions to help keep you safe. Backcountry explorers have relied on avalanche beacons for years, so we visited the Avalanche Beacon Training Park to learn more.
So we'll come on over here, open up our transceiver box, and turn on the time dial. All right, we'll flip on transceiver and switch over to search mode on my transceiver here, and I've got a signal 41 meters away. Let's start running.
An avalanche transceiver park is a whole set of equipment where we have some modified avalanche transceivers. They're not cordless, so they have cords all interlinking themselves to a mastermind box so that we can flip on one or more and activate them and practice finding them.
Can I get a probe right there? All right, we've got a strike. All right, so we get out our shovel and dig that out if it was a real scenario.
Each transceiver emits signals that travel out 360 degrees, and you use your personal transceiver, switch it to search, and hone in on a signal, get you closer and closer and closer until you can use your probe to do the real fine pointing. Most people don't take the time to practice with their avalanche transceiver often enough, so it's important to get out, practice, actually use the skill because they're life-saving. If you or your buddy don't rescue someone within 10 minutes, your chance of survival after a burial is drastically decreased. So you want to be fast, you want to be comfortable, and you want to be competent.
It's been described as the most advanced fighter jet on the market, but as Canada formally signs off on purchasing a fleet of F-35 fighter jets, questions remain about how quickly the Canadian Armed Forces can embrace the $19 billion investment. And it's considered the world's best restaurant, but the man behind Noma in Copenhagen says his restaurant will close for regular service starting next year. After the break, food columnist Shiva Reddy will break down this unexpected announcement and tell us how it might inspire Vancouver restaurateurs. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream tonight. A first-year engineering communications class at the University of Prince Edward Island recently got to participate in a competition riding their own handmade go-karts. The contest wasn't about speed or aerodynamics. It was about teamwork.
So we built these cars all by hand ourselves, and then we just took them down the track and see which one's the farthest.
Let's go! So you have to remember, these are first-year students. They never did this before.
They are cutting, they are welding, they are assembling. People think that is about the car. It's not about the car. It's all about how they communicate to make that complex project to actually work.
I found it funny at first that a design class was a communication course, but now as I look at it, it's not about just building the car. It's about interacting with different people, different cultures.
We're learning how to work with a team, so it's never been just one person with a set of tools and wood making a car. Like, everybody is playing to their own individual strengths, and everybody has had a part in making the car. And not everybody's a builder, but everybody has been a huge part of our building process.
Communication is the base of what an engineer does.
Our program is called Communications, and I've realized why. We were able to build some pretty cool projects in a car. Hopefully we'll win. We just thought, well, we may as well just call it the FSDE Taxi.
I'm the driver of the FSD Taxi. Well, we managed to come in first with a surprising victory. It was really fun, and we managed to make it out first.
They have to understand other people, different gender, ethnicity, background, talking to them. It is actually a life project that goes through the entire semester. It's actually beautiful to see comes to life.
Well, a restaurant consistently considered the world's best is closing its doors. The head chef at Noma in Copenhagen says fine dining has hit a breaking point and is unsustainable. The restaurant is known for serving new renditions of Nordic dishes and has been rated the best restaurant in the world 5 times by the world's 50 best restaurants. Renee Redzepi says the intense working environments in fine dining and long hours are just not doable, and the whole industry needs a rethink. While that closure is happening in Denmark, there are other fine dining establishments around the world facing similar problems. And here in BC, chefs and culinary experts agree they are at a crossroads. I spoke with food columnist Shiva Reddy earlier today. Shiva, these are some pretty strong words from the chef at Noma, even calling the work backbreaking. What are you hearing today around the conversation about fine dining?
There's like 2 conversations happening, I feel, right now, where the world is saddened because you have the best restaurant in the world shutting its doors. But at the same time, you have the industry saying, hey, finally somebody's talking about and wanting to pay attention to the fact that, yes, we are working backbreaking hours. It is unethical to have labor that is essentially free and worked into a model. So I think it's actually a very exciting time for the industry.
So with all of that in mind, what's sort of happening around the scene in Vancouver? Are we going to see fine dining restaurants close or perhaps just change the culture that's around them?
I mean, with that, I don't think fine dining restaurants will necessarily close because I feel like that's actually been a trend that's been happening for some time now. You're seeing a transition from fine dining at a high-end spectrum, moving to a more casual style where it's actually more sustainable to run that business. And then you are also seeing restaurants that are saying, look, even if we did want to change that, it actually is a 2-way conversation where the consumer has to opt into that conversation as well as the government doing that as well.
It's interesting to have this conversation now at a time where Vancouver has just gotten some Michelin restaurants. Can you talk about how that's helping or hurting Vancouver's food scene?
Well, the fun thing is when Noma actually entered the scene in Copenhagen, financially, Copenhagen wasn't doing that great. And with tourism being able to skyrocket after the opening of Noma and also all of the accolades it received, Copenhagen's doing pretty darn well. However, with that, the same thing is happening in Vancouver, where you are now a world-class city with Michelin restaurants, starred Michelin restaurants. But with that, you are extending your hours significantly. You're putting a lot more expectations on your, not only your guests, but also your staff significantly. And you might not be able to hire as much because you still have to make a profit and your rent is high because you're in Vancouver.
What are we hearing from people working in these restaurants here in Vancouver?
Not that much, usually. It is very scary to actually speak out about this because as soon as you do, you become blacklisted. I know that for me, it has been challenging because I do like to speak out. But with that, I find that people are seeing that it is actually okay to talk about that, especially after the pandemic and such a lockdown where you are in your thoughts for so long and realizing that this is not okay and I want something different. You're seeing people leave the industry, but you're also seeing people stay who love it so much, but are asking for that change too.
How can consumers help, still be able to enjoy that fine dining or non-fine dining food, but make ethical choices while doing it?
But that's the idea, ethical choices, and you nailed it. So we as consumers and diners are saying, we're savvy, we understand this, we're looking at regenerative products. We want to know that the produce that we are eating is sustainably farmed and is ethically produced. But we're not necessarily looking at that in terms of the people who are actually making the food for you in the restaurant standpoint. So I say that this is a moment, especially at the start of the year, to be really thoughtful on that and see if your values are actually aligning in that case and if you want to do something different.
And just really quickly before you let go, how do we actually know what standards are like for employees there and what people are experiencing inside those restaurants?
Well, I mean, just hands down across most restaurants, you are working with the same culture. It might not be to the extreme of the old school European aggressive mentality that you might see on shows like The Bear. It has gotten better, but there are still things that might not exist. For the most part, you don't have an HR team in most restaurants. You don't have a place to speak out. That is a very big part of it. But also being able to maybe not work a complete 5-day to 7-day work week, having that reduced and really focusing on mental health for each individual, no matter what rank they're at.
Okay, Shiva Reddy, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Approval ratings are plunging for members of the royal family as a scathing memoir gets set to hit shelves. Coming up, the biggest crisis for the monarchy since Charles and Diana.
It started about 20 minutes after midnight. 2 inmates, reportedly armed with knives, overpowered their 2 guards. Then, using the guards' keys, they released 11 other prisoners and fled the jail. The guards weren't hurt, but were left locked in cells.
The alert wasn't put out until at least 20 minutes to half an hour after the escape. It wasn't discovered at least until 20 minutes, half an hour.
The 13 escapers had a good head start. By daybreak 5 hours later, they had apparently split up. There were separate reports of cars stolen from neighborhoods around the prison.
3 guys came out from behind and ripped our doors open.
Burnaby RCMP are piecing together fragments of information, assembling profiles of each of the men. They range in age from their early 20s to late 30s. All are considered dangerous, held temporarily at the Ocala jail for crimes ranging from assault to murder. It was mid-afternoon before the people who run the prison would speak to reporters, and even then, there was little new information.
Did they go over the fence?
This we don't know, and of course the investigation will tell us further about that.
It's been a bad week at Ocala. Last Sunday, inmates fought with staff, attacked them with broom handles, and set fires. Then on Monday, a search of their cells and belongings turned up a number of weapons. Those incidents are still under investigation, yet until this morning, prison officials felt they had things back under control at Ocala. 4 of the escaped prisoners have now been recaptured. 9 others are still at large. While the search for them continues, the search for clues as to how they escaped has produced stunning results. Officials at Ocala admit the escape could have been avoided. 2 inmates were able to get out of their cells because the doors had been left open. The guards on shift at the time knew the doors were open and yet did nothing about it.
Some security procedures that are standard weren't followed.
He's talking about the doors.
Yes, they could have been closed.
And they didn't close them?
That's right.
Okay, that sounds like negligence.
That could well be. But again, how they were opened is yet to be determined.
The guards union called an emergency meeting this morning, apparently anticipating accusations of negligence against its members. Already it is arguing the section of the prison where the escape happened was understaffed, that the guards on duty were inexperienced. Ocala is an old and controversial prison. Over the years, there have been a number of riots here. The jail is scheduled to be replaced. The mayor of the town surrounding Ocala says that can't happen soon enough.
I mean, people want it out for a whole variety of reasons, and I guess this points out the major reason for not wanting it in a residential area.
Whether the guards or the administration is finally to blame, prison officials admit the escape is entirely the responsibility of prison staff. By the time it's all over, it's expected someone will lose their job over this. Keith Bogue, CBC News, Vancouver.
Canada has formally signed off on the final contract to buy F-35 fighter jets. It's the latest step in a more than decade-long political saga to replace the Air Force's aging CF-18s. As the CBC's Murray Brewster explains, the decision represents a dramatic turnaround for the governing Liberals.
It has been a very long journey from this to this.
We will not buy the F-35 fighter jet.
To this.
The F-35 is a modern, reliable, and agile fighter aircraft used by our closest allies in missions across the globe. It is the most advanced fighter on the market, and it is the right aircraft for our country.
The political journey may be at an end, but for the Air Force and its workhorse CF-18s, there's still a lot of runway before the F-35 lands. The first new planes won't arrive until 2026. Training needs to happen. The Canadian F-35s won't be declared ready for operations until 2029, and it could now be 2034 before the CF-18s are fully retired, making it 24 years since the Conservatives initially promised to buy the new fighter, leading to questions about what Canada has gained by waiting.
At the heart of the decision that we are discussing today is the fact that it resulted from a process that Canadians can have confidence in. It was a fair and open and competitive process.
That competition went on far too long, says the opposition.
We supported the Liberals originally in moving ahead with a competition, but why it took 7 years to make a decision that we ultimately made over a decade ago is something that cost taxpayers an exorbitant amount of money.
I think certainly this was a political football from 2010. That's what happened, right? Whenever you start off on the wrong foot, it's hard to fix it. And I think, the Prime Minister making the comment that we're not going to buy the F-35 just muddied the waters even further.
And then there's the question of how much Canadian industry will benefit. The federal government insists it got an improved deal with agreed-on targets. That, however, remains to be seen. The government talks in terms of economic opportunity and potential, rather than in concrete terms. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
1 week after Damar Hamlin's terrifying on-field collapse shook the sports world, the NFL player has been released from a Cincinnati medical center. Hamlin fell to the ground after colliding with another player during last Monday night's game. The 24-year-old suffering a cardiac arrest after what appeared to be a routine tackle. Now, in recent days, Hamlin has been able to walk as he undergoes physical therapy. This morning, he was transferred to a Buffalo hospital to continue his recovery. Doctors say they are ecstatic with the pace of Hamlin's rehabilitation. The Brazilian capital is relatively quiet tonight, one day after supporters of ex-President Jair Bolsonaro stormed government buildings. But the message from officials was loud and clear. Punishment is coming. Susan Ormiston takes us inside Brazil's political crisis.
They left a trail of violent crime, motivated by anger and politics. The mob trashed Brazil's heart of government in the name of a president who lost and cried foul. This man, pointing to a picture of Jair Bolsonaro, says, "My hero, his house." Authorities say they found 5 unexploded grenades and traces of blood, urine, and feces in presidential rooms. Rioters wielded knives and axes. More than 1,000 have been arrested or detained. Sworn in just a week ago, Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, called the riots an attempted coup. Meeting his cabinet inside the defaced building, he vowed harsh punishment. But the swarming of the capital shows the new government's failed intelligence. The demonstration was not a surprise, widely advertised and aided by some police.
What happened was that not only they went there, but they went escorted by the police. You have images of the police coming with them.
Security forces took 2.5 hours to control the scene. The governor of Brasilia, a Bolsonaro supporter, has been suspended. And encampments of followers outside army headquarters were broken up. In Florida, where Bolsonaro's been staying for a week, little sign of him Monday. His family says he went to hospital with abdominal pain. But he denies he incited any of this. And the destruction dug so deep that many, even Lula's opponents, acknowledge it went too far.
Bolsonaro has now become a liability. But today, at least, the country is united against what happened yesterday.
But echoing January 6th in America, that outrage may not last.
That's the CBC's Susan Ormiston reporting tonight. Ukrainian forces say they are weathering a powerful Russian assault in the eastern Donbass region. As Briar Stewart reports, they say the attacks are coming in waves and several towns are under bombardment.
A market 80 kilometers southeast of Kharkiv is the latest site of a Russian missile attack. At least 2 women were killed, 4 were injured, including a 10-year-old girl. Now, images from the scene, you can see the scale of the destruction. There are a number of small market stalls that have been torn apart by the blast and by the explosion. And this was the latest attack today, but it was the strategic city of Kramatorsk that was hit a number of times over the weekend, early Sunday morning, in fact. And officials with Russia's Ministry of Defense say that they were targeting a dormitory where Ukrainian soldiers were staying. They said that 2 dormitories were hit and that 600 soldiers were killed. But the facts on the ground in Ukraine tell a much different story. Reporters who have visited the scene have found that the dormitories, which were said to be decimated, are very much intact, and that there are large craters where the strikes hit, but they're on the ground. They said there's no sign that anybody had been killed or even hurt. And that's what Ukraine says. Ukraine says they did not lose any soldiers in Kramatorsk. And so you have the Russian Defense Ministry trying to push this narrative about all of these deaths. And they're really trying to sell it as retribution for an attack that happened on New Year's on their soldiers in the community of Makivka. In that attack, at least 89 Russian soldiers were killed. And I say at least because that's the number that Russia has confirmed. Well, Ukraine says that the true death toll is actually much higher, in the hundreds. And so Russia has been trying to say what they did in Kramatorsk was payback and that they successfully killed 600 soldiers. But that version really contradicts what Ukraine and reporters are saying on the ground. Today, the Kremlin was asked about the discrepancy, and all that Kremlin officials would say is that they have full confidence in the information they're getting from the Ministry of Defense. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Thousands of pilgrims descended on the historic town of Lalibela in Ethiopia this weekend to celebrate Orthodox Christmas. It It was the first time pilgrims came to the town since conflict in the Tigray began 3 years ago. Lalibela is viewed by Ethiopian Orthodox Christians as the second Jerusalem. Its medieval rock churches are a World Heritage Site, but since 2020 they've been inaccessible because of the war between Tigrayan rebels and the government. That ended as a result of a peace settlement at the end of last year. Well, several members of the royal family have seen their approval ratings plunge just as Prince Harry's memoir arrives in bookstores. As Lisa Shing reports, some royal commentators say it has plunged the monarchy into its biggest crisis since the breakup of Charles's marriage to Princess Diana.
Family relationships.
In a series of interviews, Prince Harry continues pointing fingers and spilling secrets, blaming not just the tabloids,
who want to create as much conflict as possible. The saddest part of that is certain members of my family and the people that work for them are complicit in that conflict.
and he's naming names, specifically his stepmother Camilla, who he urged his father not to marry, whom he accuses of being in bed with the press.
And with a family built on hierarchy, and with her on the way to being queen consort, there was going to be people or bodies left in the street because of that.
Just one of the many revelations in Harry's memoir, though details have already been leaked, many of them hugely personal. How he lost his virginity, took illegal drugs, crying only once over the death of his mother, Princess Diana, and his strained relations with the royals, especially his brother.
I would like to get my father back. I would like to have my brother back. At the moment, I don't recognize them as much as they probably don't recognize me.
In London, these admissions are getting mixed reviews.
I think he actually came across better than I thought he was.
The things that he's saying is not very comfortable, but he's also a human being and has right to his own opinions.
It's a first world problem to have whatever they're going through. They should just keep it to themselves and deal with it.
Unsurprisingly, keeping mum and carrying on is exactly the way the royal family is dealing with it. At least that's the image some say they're trying to project.
By rising above it, they're actually, and not getting down into this back and forth of scandalous tittle-tattle, I think it's doing them the best job that they can do.
While Harry says he wants a reconciliation, royal watchers say that's unlikely to happen anytime soon as the prince breaks from tradition. All this just months ahead of Charles's coronation. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
We are home to some of the best skiing and snowboarding in the country. But what does climate change bring for the future of BC's ski resorts? That's coming up.
Fugitive this afternoon, that leaves 8 still at large. Police say it's the biggest mass escape in the history of the province, and perhaps because of that, there has been a rush to explain why it happened.
It seems to me
on Saturday, the prison warden blamed guards for ignoring procedures.
Procedures that are standard weren't followed.
Later, the guards union blamed prison administrators for mismanaging the jail.
Management's refusal to follow branch policy resulted in both danger to staff and enabled riots to occur.
This unusual interview.
Then, in a bizarre twist, one of the escapers actually appeared on a local television newscast to blame both the guards and prison administrators for what happened. After the interview, he disappeared again.
And I'm doing 3 years right now.
The TV interview is a sore point with police.
And I think the media should find it embarrassing that one of their own did something like that.
The Attorney General is furious.
It's absolutely reprehensible. I think the public will see it for what it is, an all-time journalistic low.
I decided that I was going to leave, so I left.
But there seems no end to it. CBC Radio taped an interview with another escaper today. He actually fled the prison weeks ago, and apart from complaining about conditions on the inside, he wanted to know why his escape wasn't as big a news event as the one Friday. TV cameras were already in place even before police arrived to recapture Terry Hall. Like so much of what has happened since the breakout New Year's Day, this was a spectacle. Hall is the escaper who was interviewed on local television over the weekend. A A friend who was with him today believes his brief time in the spotlight will serve to protect him from any possible retaliation.
They can't touch him.
Why not?
Hey, here it is. What can they do?
I'm convicted of robbery.
Terry Hall argued on television that one reason he broke out was to escape the conditions inside the prison.
Please follow me.
Today, for the first time since the breakout, reporters were allowed in to see for themselves. Allowed into a prison no one is proud of, not even prison officials. The building itself is in such poor condition, prisoners were able to rip it apart and fashion makeshift weapons from it. But even the guards don't dispute that conditions helped provoke the riot and the escape.
The sooner they close it, the better.
Under this barn is the segregation unit. That's where the escape began. Reporters crowded into the narrow corridors to see how it all happened.
A sock filled with some quantity of peanuts.
Prison staff obliged with a demonstration.
Grab both of them and pull down, thereby freeing yourself.
All this was made easier for the inmates because the outer doors to their cells were left open by guards, contrary to normal procedures. The tour was a gesture from prison staff, who feel the media has been hard on them lately. There will be an inquiry into all that has taken place at Ocala this week, and today a judge was named to head that inquiry. It'll begin immediately, and as with much of what has happened, most of it will take place publicly. Keith Boak, CBC News, Vancouver.
A social media page out of Skagway, Alaska is going viral for its videos of dogs riding a bus. Mo Mountain Mutts currently has 1.3 million followers, and the video in question, 51.4 million followers.
Good morning, Jake. Well, good morning.
So cute. According to their social media pages, Mo Mountain Mutts are Alaskan dog walkers. The minute-long video shows the dogs walking onto the bus and taking their seats. Mo Thompson, the owner of the account, told CBC the dog bus is a real thing. It's not just for TikTok. They specialize in off-leash group socialization and pet training. And in a follow-up video posted to YouTube today, Mo actually explains how each of the seats are assigned. Flash flooding is forcing evacuations in several communities in and around Santa Barbara tonight. President Joe Biden has issued an emergency declaration calling for storm relief for at least a dozen counties. As Yvette Brend reports, there are threats of catastrophic flooding as the storm hits slopes already unstable due to forest fires and drought.
High winds and relentless rains flooded Santa Cruz, leading to daring rescues and crashed trees into homes.
Just after midnight, there was a gigantic crash.
This after a series of storms already took the lives of at least 12 people. Joe Costa tried but failed to save a woman living in a tent near his along the Sacramento River.
It snapped off and landed on my neighbor's tent, and I started yelling for 911.
We've been dealing with this since between Christmas and New Year's. And we're a week and a half into this already with another week and a half to go.
Rivers and creeks have flooded roads and fields. Now 32,000 people in Santa Cruz County have been ordered out of their homes. And those in nearby Montecito have been urged to leave now after 20 centimeters of rain fell within 12 hours.
This is rapidly evolving, and we have major issues that are occurring across the county with respect to road closures and so forth. This is not a day to be out doing anything if you don't have to.
Now behind me is one of these sump pump stations, these really big ones. So walk with me here. You can see how high the water is here.
Rob Karlmark showed fields near the Sacramento River Sunday. He says he hasn't seen this much water since 1986, a record flood year. Meteorologists like him warn that the storms won't stop for another 9 days, jarring news for those already hit. Along with those rains, more high winds. So even as Californians clean up,
honest to God, I saw the tree coming right at me.
There's more danger on the way. Yvette Brend, CBC News, Vancouver.
Yeah, the pictures are just incredible to see. And this is an area that doesn't experience rain like this, right?
I mean, you barely get rain in LA in one calendar year, let alone that much. And that raging river that we saw a little bit of visuals of, Ellen was actually there earlier, posted something on Instagram about how fast that river was raging. So she's at a higher elevation in the area, but that area is well occupied by lots of celebrities and well-known names. So hopefully everyone's going to be okay. Here for us, we are dealing with the aftermath of getting quite a bit of rain, and now we're going to be transitioning into a bit of a break right now tonight. Still some scattered showers for most of Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. So they'll be on and off for the rest of tonight into tomorrow morning. And then by about Tuesday noontime, things do clear up. Cloudy conditions take over for about a day and a half before we do return to some more rain that's going to be coming in by Wednesday evening, and it's going to stick around for quite a few days. Lots of rain coming in that new system. I'll have those details in a second here. Current temperatures outside right now, 8 degrees at the airport, 7 on the North Shore, 8 degrees in Nanaimo. It's feeling quite humid and balmy out there as well. The humidity right now very high at 78 degrees. Today's high was 8 degrees, a couple of degrees above the average for this time of year. So if you're feeling a little bit warmer than usual, that is the reason why. Record set at 11.7 degrees as a high back in 1953, a low of -10 back in 73. And like I said, the rain break starts Tuesday morning, lasts until about Thursday morning, and then comes the rain back again on Thursday. 30 to 40 millimeters expected, more on a Friday, and then switching to scattered light rain on and off for Saturday and Sunday, about a 60% chance of rain, and that light rain will continue into Monday as well to start off next week. So a break, lots more rain, and really dry up the next couple of days. I say enjoy some sun that we will be getting. Anita?
We'll be sure to do that. Thanks, Kuljeet.
You're welcome.
Well, this month has brought record warm conditions in much of Europe. And while not as deadly as a summer heat wave, it is wreaking havoc on the ski season there. But how will climate change affect winter sports in Canada heading forward? CBC meteorologist Kuljeet Kaila explains.
While cold winter weather may send some of us running for cover, for many Canadians, it's an open invitation to get outside and hit the slopes. But what will these ski hills look like as our winters and our climate continue to warm?
We've done modeling throughout Canada, the US, much of Europe, and then we've also looked at all of the different Winter Olympic hosts. So those are dispersed across Asia, Europe, and North America. Canada does generally better than most places as a country.
But even within our borders, there's a lot of wiggle room. Ontario has seen some of the biggest changes to date, with green Christmases stalling seasons at Blue Mountain. But Quebec and the Rockies have fared a little better.
When you get over into the interior BC, you get that real cold and reliable cold to make snow, but you also get reasonable amount of snow coming over the mountains. You see that in some of the passes and stuff that become unpassable at times.
Research shows American ski seasons have been growing progressively shorter over the past decade, and Scott believes the same trend is already underway here in Canada. If correct, Scott says we can expect another 10 to 15 years of relative stability, but changes could ramp up by 2050 depending on how warm we get.
Low emission, sort of successful Paris climate agreement, not much different than today. A bit more, certainly higher operating costs, a little bit shorter season, but in the mid-century under a high emission scenario, you're already pushing the limits for snowmaking in some key parts of the year around Christmas, holiday, New Year's.
While a shorter season could hurt communities that rely on nearby slopes for tourism, it's unlikely that interest in skiing and snowboarding is going anywhere.
If a big chunk of your competitors go out of business and demand stays the same relatively, which is what we've seen in record warm winters, the demand doesn't go away. There's market share to be had. And so that's what you'll probably see both in the western regions, but in the eastern regions.
Many in the industry are already working to adapt, whether it's harvesting snow elsewhere, making their own, or diversifying into more summer activities. But across the board, two things are certain. Ski seasons will get shorter and operating costs will go up. Kuljeet Kaila, CBC News, Edmonton.
The new program encouraging kids to enjoy winter sports and read more. How the two go hand in hand after the break.
You couldn't move along the streets. You couldn't drive along the streets because it was full of trees that had come down.
Sam Bosky remembers how 25 years ago, the lovely trees lining the streets of NDG became a major liability as the freezing rain fell. Branches snapped under the weight of the accumulating ice, taking power lines with them and plunging whole areas into the dark.
But part of the major problem was that we had no idea how long this was going to go on. And there was a lot of people without radio, without television. The question of even letting them know what kind of resources were available became the major challenge.
As hydro crews cleared branches and tried to restore power, people across the island turned to public shelters to escape the cold.
I'm not used to leaving my house. I live alone, but I have very, very good friends, and they got after me and they said, Martha, we're not going to leave you in the house.
Others stayed put and made do with what resources they had on hand.
Why are you barbecuing?
So we could eat. We don't got no power.
But if the situation in Montreal was bad, the worst hit area was just to the city's east, in the so-called Triangle of Darkness.
Everything broken. Everything.
Gilles Baudouin was one of the last in the province to get his power back after his home in Sainte-Rosalie was off the grid for 32 days. He ended up driving to Vermont to score a generator from a U.S. Honda dealer.
You were just finishing to prepare the last one. You went to Cape Cod to find one for us.
Still, despite the enormous challenges and even tragedies, many remember how people banded together, sharing what they had with friends, neighbors, and strangers. Nahmeh Shafii had just moved here with her family from Iran 3 days before the storm started. They had no home, no access to their money, but her aunt in the West Island had a fireplace.
So not only were they hosting us, a family of 5 who just arrived from Iran, but they were hosting a lot of other friends who didn't have warmth in their homes. So we were just like a really big family.
Showing that in the face of collective hardship, for so many, the ice storm is remembered as a story of resilience and warmth against the cold winter darkness. Simon Akineshny, CBC News, Montreal.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
Ring in the Year of the Rabbit with CBC Vancouver at the annual Chinatown Spring Festival Parade on Sunday, January 22nd. Join us along the parade route and celebrate the Lunar New Year with fun and festivities for the whole family. Enjoy traditional lion and dragon dances, marching bands, and martial arts performances. Learn more at cbc.ca/BC.
A collaborative skiing and storytelling project in Kimberley, BC is aiming to get kids moving and reading. As the CBC's Corey Bullock reports, the new ski story program at the Kimberley Nordic Club is encouraging literacy and activity through the story of the Gruffalo.
Every day, Kootenay kids head outside to play. It's a common occurrence to see families on the slopes on the weekend, but a new program at the Kimberley Nordic Club combines skiing with a story.
Terrible teeth and his terrible jaws.
The Nordic Club and Kimberley Public Library have come together to present an interactive storytelling of the popular children's book, The Gruffalo. And what do you think about combining a ski with a story?
I love it.
The two organizations hope to encourage a combination of physical activity and literacy within their youngest user groups.
Being physical in the world allows us to engage in all the senses provide, and we then are curious about what the world is and what's going on out there. So I think the combination of physical activity allows sort of that curiosity to then reinforce reading.
The Gruffalo is told across 12 boards stationed along a popular 2-kilometer cross-country ski trail.
You know, the mandate of the library is to promote our services and promote literacy in fun and engaging ways. And often that comes outside of the traditional walls of the library. And
it's a unique project they hope will have a lasting impact.
Kids won't necessarily know that they're learning and reading, and then they're just out to have a good time.
It's also seen as a way to get children out and engaging in the community.
Pandemic was really difficult and very isolating for lots of people, including families. So this was a priority for us to open up library services again and let people know that there's different ways of using the library.
And what better way to get kids outside to play than with a ski and a story? Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
To Vernon now, where some folks took the annual ice plunge to a whole different level. Shonda Hill and her friends created a gigantic floating ice smile in Cal Lake. When I say gigantic, you can see here it is gigantic. The ultra athlete and her friends filmed their 18,000-pound smiley face as they dove into Cal Lake. The icy smile is more than 30 feet across and was hand-chopped using axes. Hill told CBC's Daybreak Kelowna that it took them more than an hour and a half to finish. The friends are all a part of the Vernon Lake Plunge group. Maybe if I got to plunge off that gigantic smiley face, I'd actually do the cold water dip, but I'm not sure even that could get me out. Kudos, though, to that group. 18,000 pounds of dedication. Thanks for being with us on CBC Vancouver News tonight. That is it for our show. We'll see you tomorrow.